Johnny Mac, Jody Mac, here with you on Birds 365. We had our third party. You're recognizing the face these days because he's good enough to join us every Wednesday here on Birds 365. And I swore I thought I saw him outside. Did you double back and go, yeah, no, this was a bad idea. Let me go inside. It's getting a little bit cold. Or did I just make that up? He doesn't have the inside signal.
Oh, no, man. I thought maybe my
Oh,
Christmas tree looked like I was outside, but
there we go. Yeah,
I'm inside.
I'm impressed that you got all the Christmas decorations up, Mike. I have not started, to say the least. We lost.
Don't give me any points. My girlfriend, she was all over it.
All right, there we go. That's usually the way it happens.
My wife suggested I do it Sunday. I'm going, hello, National Football League. No, we won't be bringing a tree up from the basement today.
Well,
talk to me Tuesday or Wednesday.
The fact that the Eagles played a night game was the reason. It was like, all right, the Eagles are on at night. We're going to take over. No, the TV is right here. So the TV's on while the tree's going up, and I'm just kind of observing and watching. So, yeah, it was a little early this year because last year we went so late that she was very focused on making sure that we got that tree up early this year. We only got like 2 weeks of tree last year.
I like it. Very focused, much like the Eagles. 10-1 level of focus to get it up that early. I know you got a chance, Mike, to talk to Malcolm Jenkins. Malcolm was doing the rounds yesterday because he had a function yesterday in town. It's ironic. I saw him a couple weeks ago at practice before the CJ Gardner-Johnson injury, obviously. And all of a sudden, it pops up, and there's Malcolm in town. Just happens to be in front of the cameras recently. So, Philadelphia fans. Well, let's call Malcolm. Now, I'm sure you asked Malcolm, does he want to play? Does he want to come back to a 10-1 team? Does he want a ring shot for another ring? And could he? He's still the property of the New Orleans Saints, which is complicating matters a little bit.
So I asked him in 3 different ways, right? Just flat out asked him, hey, do you have any interest in playing? And he said, I said, hey, listen, you're in town tonight. And now CJ Gardner-Johnson was supposed to be at the event with him.
Yeah.
I don't know that he ended up showing up or not, but it was billed that he would be at the event. So I said, hey, he's supposed to be there. What if Howie showed up and said, hey, he's not going to play. Would you like to play? And he said, well, I would listen, but this is, and he went into this, long diatribe about how he's happy watching games. And then I asked him about, now that you're watching games, now you can see how fans can be so irrational. And he kind of laughed at that. So then I asked him, well, you used to play for the Saints and they're in the division mix. What if they wanted you to play? And he said, well, I live in Philly and in New Orleans. I watch both teams, and I'm enjoying watching both of the teams. But, yeah, I mean, I can't, say no if. And then I asked him, essentially, watching Sue and Joseph return at 35 years old, does that make you think like, hey, I only have to do this for a month? And that one, he kind of said, watching those guys hasn't made me want to do this. Like, getting into these collisions, I'm perfectly fine where I'm sitting. So it was kind of like 3 different angles of him saying, I'd listen, but I'm content with what I'm doing. I didn't get the sense, now maybe in some of the other conversations he had, that he was more forthcoming. I didn't get the sense that he was just ready to jump back out on the field if the Eagles made a call, that he's just sitting there waiting for the phone to ring.
No, I saw him on John Clark on NBC 10 last night, and he laid it out. Listen, I'm not even a free agent, so there's going to be hoops and they're going to have to be jumped through. He didn't dismiss it, but as you kind of
he left a crack. I would say he left a crack.
It's the Howie crack. That's why you never know if Howie's going to show up. It's
interesting, John, and you said you have Grayson coming on at next hour. Yeah. Grayson and I, because Grayson works with us as well, and we were at Radio Row at the Super Bowl in Miami, and we had Malcolm on, and he was set to become a free agent that offseason.
Yeah.
And he had said to us, look, this is a business, man, and this is their move. I want to be back. This is up to them. So you don't know how the relationship was left between him and Howie. Obviously, they didn't sign him, but he did say he wanted to come back here and that it was on them that he was not back here. So it might not be this friendly pick up the phone. Hey, man, how are things? Now, 2 years have blown over. Malcolm's still a great individual in the community. I don't think he held any grudges, but at that time, you don't know how it was left.
No, it wasn't great at that time, but the Eagles were in a different spot. I think Malcolm probably took a step back, realized, look, that's a difficult job to be a GM in this league.
Yes.
You got to make difficult decisions, and one of the most difficult, arguably the most difficult, is to move on from a great player. Malcolm was a great player, wanted to continue to play, but he was a descending player. The Eagles weren't ready to win at the time. He does love the city. Malcolm loves the city. Always said he was coming back. He was going to live here. And he toggles back and forth between here and New Orleans. But I do think there was a strained relationship at the time. But I do think Malcolm's gotten over it.
Yeah.
As I said, he was a practice. He just shows up when he wants to. So that sort of that if there was a disconnect, it's been repaired from that perspective. So I don't think that would be the biggest hurdle. I think the biggest hurdle would be the Saints are probably a little bit bitter that they getting constantly taken over a barrel by the Eagles. So they wouldn't be willing necessarily to, oh yeah, go ahead, take them. They'd want something. Now, Jody and I joke, they're not getting that first round pick back, but it might take a 7th round pick. It might take something late in the draft. And then to even have to start the conversation. But for me, Mike, it comes down to somebody like Malcolm Jenkins is only in the conversation if Chauncey is not going to come back at all. Because you need, if Malcolm's here, he's not here to be a backup. He's here to be a starter.
Yeah.
And if CJ's here and Marcus Epps stays healthy, who's played every single snap this season, the Eagles are very happy with their safeties.
Yeah, and I guess I did see a portion. I guess John Clark had Malcolm on his Takeoff podcast, and I think the way that he phrased the question to Malcolm was that Chauncey is playing out of position, that he has played mostly slot corner, I believe, in New Orleans, and that if Malcolm came in, that they could move Gardner back to his more natural spot. I don't think with Avonte Maddox returning that would be the case either. So, yeah, I think you would be in a situation if you brought Malcolm here, it would be either one of two things. One, CJ's done for the year, or two, Malcolm is well aware that he's stepping in on a very limited starting role until Gardner-Johnson's back. Now, could they get creative with him if he showed that he's still in shape and he can play? John, you might know better talking to people around the league. How effective was he in his last season or two in New Orleans? Was he the same? Jim Schwartz used him very dynamically here, all over the field. He used him in coverage. He used him on the tight end. He used him on the slot. He used him in the box. I mean, he used him in multiple ways here. Was New Orleans using him in that way? Was he still effective? I mean, you said on my show yesterday that you saw him at practice recently, and he didn't seem to be in his playing shape, weight anyway. So is he ready to kind of get off the couch, run right on the field like Linval Joseph and Ndamukong Suh were? I don't know. Yeah.
He was more of a linebacker than a safety his last couple of years. And I think he was. I think you bring out the point. I think it was a great fit for what Jim Schwartz wanted to do. Jim played him at every single position on the back end of the defense. Think about that. Every single position.
And he played every snap.
Yeah. So he moved them all over. This group, they want mirrored safeties. They want single cover 2 safeties, guys who can play zone, guys who can cover. And that's why you say, and I get what John was trying to do, John Clark, because Chauncey played nickel corner with the Saints, but the Eagles don't think he's out of position. They think he's in position now, playing safety for them. And they want that coverage ability at the safety spot, and that's Marcus as well. So
well, and that's interesting because that takes us. I asked Malcolm yesterday about, does he believe that John Gannon needs to blitz more? When he watches this team, do you watch this team and say, man, John Gannon, this defense needs to blitz more? Do you think they need to blitz more? And his immediate answer was, I don't. He explained in almost laughter as to why they do not need to blitz more and why he thinks it is so ridiculous when
for Malcolm. Way to go, Malcolm.
When people suggest that they need to blitz more. Now, he's saying it from a safety's perspective, saying, I don't want them to blitz more. Now you're leaving me on the island back there by myself. And he said, look, teams that blitz more, it's almost like a team that needs a gimmicky offense to try to move the ball. They don't have the talent, so they have to come up with something gimmicky. His point was, to him, the Eagles don't need to be a gimmick defense, meaning they don't need to blitz. They have enough pressure and talent. Now, the frustrating part is the pressure, you can't predict when it's going to get there. But in the eyes of, and he said, any coordinator worth their salt does not want to blitz.
That is correct. I say that a million. There's not a defensive coordinator in the world, perhaps with the exception of Wink Martindale, that wants to blitz. That's not true, but there are very few. Everybody wants to get home with 4. Everybody.
Right.
Everybody.
Well, and that goes to, C.J. Gardner-Johnson has 6 interceptions. He has 60 tackles. He has 8 passes broken up. And that's a byproduct of he's back in coverage. They don't need him to be coming off the edges, and they don't need to. Now, I think, I had so much time with Malcolm to extrapolate, a little bit longer on that. But his point was, statistically speaking, the Eagles are really good. What he sees is a team that makes mistakes, but then the next week, he's not seeing that same mistake. And he feels like you're going to make mistakes through the season, but by the time you get to the playoffs, that those things should be taken care of, and that he sees them trending in that direction.
By the way, Jody and Mike, Eagles are up to number 2, second-ranked defense in the entire NFL.
As per yards per game.
Yeah. Well, that's the traditional metric.
Traditional, right. And there are new ones that they use. By the way, defensive coordinators would like to get home with 3 or 2. They'd love to have the entire team in coverage, but 4 is the standard that everybody works with.
Well, I said yesterday on my show, Jody, if the Eagles, statistically speaking, were in the same spot where they are, which is number 2 in yards against the pass, they are 3rd in sacks. They average 19 points a game, I think is 8th or 9th. If those numbers were exactly the same, but they blitzed 40% of the time, people would think this defense is great.
Yeah,
same defense.
That's
metrics.
The Philadelphia mindset, and it hasn't changed in 40 years, and it's not going to change over the next 40 years either. All right, if not Malcolm Jenkins, let's say, and I do believe this is the most likely scenario, that Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is going to be put on IR, but they believe that he's going to be back for the playoffs. We got 6 weeks to go, 4 weeks for IR, 2 weeks in between, where they may or may not be playing hard, depending on how the 4 weeks go without him and what the standings say. They need another body. Marcus Blair up from the practice squad, reaching out for someone else who they're familiar with. If Malcolm's not happening for varying reasons that we've touched on for the last 15, 20 minutes, who are they going to bring in?
That's a good question, because if you look around, and I heard you guys talking about Jaquiski Tart before I jumped on, you're looking at veteran players maybe that had some sort of connection to your defense. And I heard John quickly squash Jaquiski Tart down. Who was the guy that was here a couple of years ago? He ended up with the Jets. Will
Parks.
Will Parks.
Will's out playing for the Jets.
No, I'm saying, but that type of guy who was kind of floating around. I don't know that guy's kind of floating around right now, a veteran player who's just been bouncing around from, who is your Corey Graham out there right now, right? You mentioned Anthony Harris. He's already in Denver, so you missed out on that situation. I don't know that you have a veteran logical choice out there, and you're going to have to hope that Kayvon Wallace, if he gets called on. Now, I know yesterday John Gannon went on glowingly about the third down play that Kayvon Wallace made in that game on Sunday night. So I'm imagining they're going to roll with him as the backup guy. And if something happened, Blankenship will probably be the starter, and then Wallace would be the next guy. And then there's probably somebody, Chachere or somebody who has been in camp here that will roll in and be that extra guy here. But I don't think, guys, you're going to see them do what they did on the defensive line and go out and find a 34-year-old veteran player to come in here and be a stand-in. Quite frankly, too, I mean, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, we don't know the extent of this injury, but you've got 6 weeks, possibly a bye in the first round, which would give you another week. Zach Ertz played with this injury after 2 weeks. Now, he rushed back, but that was after 2 weeks. We're talking about 6, possibly 7 weeks. So I would think they would imagine that he is going to come back and play at some point, unless this injury is way more severe than they are leading on, or that the reports, I mean, I know Zach Ertz, I think he missed one regular season game. And then they played Seattle in the wild card, and he played in that game. So this would be one of those things where I would be pretty surprised, which is why I don't think the Eagles are going to have to panic and do what we're suggesting here.
I did talk to a couple doctors yesterday. So there are different levels. So every lacerated kidney is not the same. So there are severity levels. Zach should not have played. He did play. So I think, that's pie in the sky to think he'd be back in 2 weeks. But I do think, average-wise, if you look at the history, Andrew Luck, I brought up, Keenan Allen, I brought up guys who were shut down with lacerated kidneys versus somebody like Zach Ertz, who's came back as quickly as I've ever heard anybody come back. I think you're going to see somewhere in between. And right around that 4 week, which is why I think it's a difficult decision for the Eagles and IR, because do you carry him on the roster, hope he comes back over that span, or do you move him to IR and use the roster spot? So that's going to be the interesting part of it. We're Wednesday morning with Mike Gill. We got away from this tradition, but we're back. Player of the week, Jalen Hurts. Got to announce that. Player of the week, offensive player of the week, Jalen Hurts.
Oh, you're talking NFL. I thought you were talking about Gill's segment.
No, but every week Gill would come on.
Every week at the start of the year, the Eagles won some kind of player of the week. Oh, you faked me out on that one, John. All right, Gill. Yeah, good job out of you. We thought you were the good luck charm for the longest time.
Well, I was for a while there.
They took about a 7-week hiatus there, buddy. Good to have you back. Thank you, Mike Gill.
Yeah, Jalen Hurts' game, by the way, if you are trying to find something that stand out something, because when you're looking at MVP, Mahomes' numbers are going to dwarf him in the traditional passing sense. I mean, you're going to put those two guys up next to each other, and Mahomes, the voters, I would imagine, I'm not a voter, would go to the traditional passing. How many touchdowns? How many yards? The team's winning. They're the number 1 seed. Mahomes is going to have all the traditional stats to back up his candidacy. And quite frankly, if you're asking me, you take Patrick Mahomes off that team, they're average. If they are average.
What do you think the Eagles are with Gardner-Minshew?
This isn't a slight on Hurts. I think Hurts has his style of play that has helped this team get to 10-1, no question. But I think the Eagles roster 53 is better than Kansas City's offense. Who do they have to throw to? You're throwing the ball to Juju.
Kelsey guy can play a little bit, Gil. In case you haven't noticed, he's pretty good, Kelsey.
Kelsey is very good. I'm not taking away from him, but I'm talking about when your tight end is your best weapon, that kind of limits the explosion of your offense sometimes, where you can get a guy who catches the ball over the middle, and he's great. But he's throwing the ball to Juju Smith-Schuster and Marcus Valdez-Scantling. I mean, come on. If Marcus Valdez-Scantling and Juju Smith-Schuster were here with Dallas Goedert, what would this offense look like? You saw it last year.
Eagle receivers, Kansas City receivers. Who's the best receiver?
A.J. Brown.
Wrong. Kelsey. It's not even close.
That's
semantics.
Yeah, it
No,
depends
it's not. It's a simple question, A or B, and you're picking B. I'm taking A. Kelsey's the best receiver on either of the two teams.
Okay,
Well,
well,
I think
as
if
a
you want to go
grouping,
proven Hall of Fame, yeah. I mean, Travis Kelce certainly has done it
Forget
for
Hall of
longer.
Fame. He's got 12 touchdown passes this year. 12
he's the
touchdown
only guy they have to throw
I'm
to.
talking about 2022. Not what he did previously. 2022. This year, the best receiver, Patrick Mahomes has the best receiver of any receivers on either two teams this year.
Yeah, but I think it's a different. It's not, and a lot of it has to do with scheme and coaching. I mean, Andy deserves a lot of credit for it as well. Great player, but I mean, you put AJ Brown on Kansas City, Andy's gonna. I've talked about AJ Brown and
He would be
and
Terrell Owens.
And the impact he's had on this offense and the domino effect. It's not even about the catches. It depends what I hear what Jody's saying, but it depends what you're looking for. Where I agree with Mike is the Eagles have a better roster than Kansas City. I've been saying this for weeks, and Buffalo as well.
Oh, and by the way,
from 2 through
Kansas
53,
Kansas City, for some reason, roster. Kansas City also, if you look at their schedule, we talk about who they haven't beaten anybody all year. Nobody. The only games they played that were any good.
Nobody's beaten anybody because nobody can play.
I get that, but my point is, nobody will say, well, Kansas City, I don't believe in. They haven't beaten anybody. No, we believe in Kansas City for two reasons. Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. We believe in Buffalo, not because of who have they beaten or who they've lost to, is because they have Josh Allen. Yeah. People have trouble believing in the Eagles. It's because they have a quarterback and a coach who are unknowns to the NFL public, coupled with an easy crutch to say, well, they haven't beaten anybody. Kansas City does not have one quality win all season long. Not one. But we believe in them.
Mike, you wouldn't call beating San Francisco a quality win?
I would, but at the time when they played San Francisco, I think we can all acknowledge that San Francisco team was kind of beat up. I like San Francisco. I think they're probably, if not the best team. I love
San Francisco. Yeah, but San Francisco today is a lot different from
that team.
And by the way, they beat Tennessee too. Who would you have to beat for Mike Gill to call it a quality win?
Hey, I'm just echoing what I hear all the time. Tennessee, to me, I think most people, right, would say, I don't believe in that team all that much. Do we look at Tennessee?
I love Tennessee. I think they're a good team. I
like Tennessee. I feel like Tennessee is
for the Eagles this week.
Big time test. There's no question. But do we think Tennessee is a legitimate Super Bowl? No. We've seen this act before. No, do we think they're a legitimate Super Bowl?
No, I hear what you're saying. I hear it all the time with the Eagles. Not everybody, but there's a group that says the Eagles have not beaten anybody. It's a dumb argument. You can say it about every team in this league because nobody believes in everybody. I can't force people to say Tennessee's a good team or Cincinnati's a good team or some of these. They're maybe not Super Bowl contenders, but they're good, solid teams that are really difficult to beat. People don't value that. And again, not everybody, but there's a large group of people that do not value any win in the NFL. So I know what Mike is saying. But the Eagles, 9-2 Minnesota team, Dallas, but then the excuses come in. Well, Kirk Cousins can't play at night. Well, he won at night on Thanksgiving. Dallas can't, Dallas didn't have Dak Prescott. All right. Well, they beat everybody else with Cooper Rush when they were out there, but they couldn't beat the Eagles.
And oh, by the way, Dak came back and the Packers beat Dak. So how do we, if the point is the whole strength of schedule thing is not even handedly dispersed around the NFL, that I agree with. But Mike, you said Kansas City hasn't beaten anybody. We don't like when they do that to the Eagles. We shouldn't like it when they do it to Kansas City.
Well, I think Jody
has actually played. If you were just talking about those two teams, line up their schedules to this point. Draw the line underneath who's played a harder schedule, tougher schedule. The Chiefs have.
Well, I think the point is Kansas City. Yes, they've beaten San Francisco, who I like. Tennessee, who I think is a solid team. That's their 2 wins. Philadelphia has
And
beaten
the Eagles
Minnesota.
have too. The
All right,
Cowboys
well,
and the Vikings.
and Philadelphia,
It's the same thing.
right? Philadelphia has beaten Minnesota and Dallas. They both have 2 wins that we value, but most people do not. If you look at those teams,
and most
other than that, they lost to
teams.
Indianapolis, right? That gets conveniently forgotten that Kansas City has lost to Indianapolis. They lost to Buffalo. You know, when they played a very good team, they lost that game. Every other team they've beaten, I think you're not like, wow, this Kansas City team is just ripping through this schedule. They are crushing teams. No, they've gotten into some fights this year, including against a Rams team who can't get out of its own way last week. They kind of slogged their way through that one. So I don't know that Kansas City, other than their reputation, has people believing in them. And their reputation, by the way, is warranted with the guy they have who should win the MVP, which is the crux of this conversation, which was when you put Hurts and what he did this week to be player of the week, this was kind of a signature game for him, but not in the traditional sense for voters to look at.
Yeah. And he's not going to win MVP. Jody and I talked about it. He's not going to win MVP unless there's some kind of weird implosion by Patrick Mahomes over the final weeks of the season, which I don't think is coming. But
maybe they'll play a good team.
Guess what? If you finish second in the voting, man, that's pretty good. And I got to tell you, if you ask me, Mike Gill, who's going to be number 2 in the NFL MVP voting before the season, I would have not come up with Jalen Hurts.
Well, Jody, when we started doing this show back in August and you asked me, or maybe John brought up, hey, if you have to pay Jalen Hurts $40 million, that's the going rate for a quarterback. I remember at that time almost falling off my seat here thinking,
now it's a bargain. It's a bargain.
Right. Now you're thinking to yourself, you're pretty much going to have to pay this guy $40 million.
Oh, yeah, it's a lock. All right, listen, last thing, we're running a little late. We got off on several fun, debatable tangents, but I want to run this by both you guys because my buddy Ricky Ricardo asked it of me last night at 2 o'clock in the morning on WIP, and I had immediate response, and then I thought about it and said, it's not as outrageous as you made it sound, John. Are we in trouble because have the Eagles potentially peaked? Is there something that we're not even taking into consideration that the Eagles have become this team that is 10-1, but in actuality, they've kind of peaked. And if you look at the Eagles, there's really only one realistic way to go, and that would be down rather than up. They can't get any better than 10-1, can they? Do either of you have a fear that the Eagles have peaked?
Even if you have peaked, there's not to say in a roller coaster of a season, you can't reach back up to that point. The Rams did it last year. They lost 3 straight games, week 9, 10. They were on a bye in week 11. They lost in week 12. They had played really well. They lost 3 games in a row, and then they ended up getting hot and won the Super Bowl. So I think these seasons all have peaks and valleys. I'm not sure that the Eagles have hit their highest of highs yet. The Minnesota, we were talking earlier in the year, well, they're only scoring in the first half. They're not scoring in the second half. We haven't seen a game where they have had the offensive explosion and then the defense shutout. Yeah, they've had some offensive explosions in a quarter, but not throughout a whole game yet. I still think they're building towards more consistency on the offensive side of the ball. Losing Goddard, I think, has put them in a downward here. Hopefully, when he's back, that puts the roller coaster back up. I think defensively, they're still kind of, finding their way as they're adding some new pieces here and there. So, no, I don't think it's outlandish to think that they could still hit another peak. I think football seasons are filled with multiple peaks and valleys. Can you get back to that peak at the right time? I don't know that they've hit their highest of high yet, and they certainly haven't hit the lowest of low. They probably will have a game somewhere along the line here where they just don't have it. That will happen.
Yeah. I keep waiting for it. It might be this week because I like this Tennessee team. At Mike Gill Show, each and every day, drive time 97.3, ESPN South Jersey. Listen to him there. With me, I said, Jody, this team's in a lull right now. It started in Houston. They lose to Washington. Indianapolis, they grind it out. weren't great against Green Bay, a little bit better. They're definitely in a lull, but I think Mike brings up the good point. Dallas Goedert comes back. These are not season-ending injuries. Devonta Maddox comes back. CJ Gardner-Johnson comes back. You got a chance, if you get that first-round bye, and then you hit the playoffs, and you got all your talent, which I think 2 through 53, I think the Eagles have the best roster in the NFL when they're healthy.
When healthy.
They got to get healthy. Got to get healthy.
Mikey Gill, thank you very much for hopping on board. You got to do some more decorating on that Christmas tree. It looks good, but you could add a little bit of style and panache.
Got to contribute, Mike. You got to contribute. That's my wife, I think, saying that. I got to.
When I went on that long journey this summer, I was in Rome, I was in Croatia, I was in Paris, I was in Dublin. I have one Christmas ball from each city to represent.
Nice. Very nice.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think it's funny. I think Croatia, somebody will correct me on the stream, because of the World Cup, the Croatian team, I believe, is called the Eagles or something with Eagles. And the hashtag Eagles is for Croatia, and everybody uses it.
It's not Croatia, but yes.
It's Serbia. Is it Serbia or Croatia?
I think it's Serbia. And I'm no World Cup guy, so don't act like I'm the gospel
Serbia.
here.
I'm going to get in trouble.
Serbia. I'm no World Cup guy, so I'm not the gospel here. But it's funny. We wonder why we can't beat Wales in soccer. When I was in Croatia, 11 kids in an alleyway with a coach running up and down the alley, a cobblestone alley with a soccer ball on their foot, getting just
I love the
berated at their skills. And I said, that's why we can't beat these teams in soccer.
It's football, Mike.
Football. Yeah, you got to make sure you get that part of it right too. Yeah. Mikey Gill, thank you very much. We'll talk to you again next Wednesday. Mike Gill from the Sports Pass, 97.3 ESPN down the shore. Johnny Mac, Jody Mac, the Mac and Mac guys here on Bird 365. As we've already mentioned, Scott Grayson, Fox 29, going to join us coming up in about 20 minutes. Stay right here.